Here is the latest Higher Summits forecast brought to you by our friends at the Mount Washington Observatory.
Weather above treeline in the White Mountains is often wildly different than at our trailheads. Before you hike, check the Higher Summits forecast at mountwashington.org. Weather observers working at the nonprofit Mount Washington Observatory write this elevation-based forecast every morning and afternoon. Search and rescue teams, avalanche experts, and backcountry guides all rely on the Higher Summits forecast to anticipate weather conditions above treeline. You should too. Go to mountwashington.org or text forecast to 603-356-2137.
And here's your forecast for Friday, October 13th and Saturday, October 14th. So Thursday night, they're looking at trace to 2 inches up in the higher summits. So that means Friday into Saturday might be a little interesting. And definitely time to break out the crampons, just in case. So Friday, in the clouds under cloudy skies with a chance for a snow shower early. High in the upper 20s, north winds shifting northwest 50 to 70 miles per hour, with gusts up to 85 miles per hour, decreasing to 40 to 55 miles per hour late. The wind chill is going to be 5 below to 5 above, rising to 0 to 10 above. Friday night, in the clouds under partly cloudy skies and trending towards clearing. Chance for snow showers. Upper 20s for a low. Winds northwest at 40 to 55 miles per hour early, increasing to 45 to 60 miles per hour midnight, with gusts up to 75 miles per hour. And the wind chill is going to clock in around 0 to 10 above, rising to 10 to 20 above. And then Saturday, in and out of the clouds under increasingly cloudy skies with a high around 30 degrees. Winds will be blowing northwest at 45 to 60 miles per hour, with wind gusts up to 75 miles per hour. And the wind chill with the wind will be 10 to 20 above. So get ready for cold weather, high winds, and watch out for the old slippery conditions. Have a good one out there.
Broadcasting from the Woodpecker Studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stump.
All right, Stomp, 125 here. Did you have fun reading the weather forecast?
Oh, yeah. Holy moly. Winter is here.
It's going to be burly out.
Yeah, for sure. And snow's in the forecast. And if you didn't read the full discussion about the forecast, I recommend it this weekend because the weather is changing quick. And it's time to start packing the winter stuff for sure if you're going above tree line.
Yeah, I'm going tomorrow. Matter of fact, I'm going to be in King Ravine and then maybe going up above tree line a little bit. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be windy and cold, so I'm going to be bringing the winter gear.
Yeah, high winds. Winds.
Yeah, very high. So we'll see. I'm trying to help Nobby hikes out. Like, we've already pivoted a little bit, but we'll get into that in a minute, though.
Anyway. Oh, sure.
All right, Stomp. So welcome to episode 125 of the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast. This week, we're going to focus on some history, so we're joined by Kim Varney Chandler, who is the author of the book Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. In addition to her writing, Kim maintains the coveredbridgesnewhampshire.com website and hosts a podcast of the same name. She's also a researcher, amateur genealogist, photographer, bird watcher, and dog lover, and she does a little bit of hiking too. So she has her dog's name is Pemi, so that's pretty cool. So Kim's going to be here to do a segment with us to share some stories about covered bridges, the history and people behind these iconic landmarks in New Hampshire and the larger Northeast region. All this, plus we've got some snow on Mount Washington, which we just touched on a little bit before, an avalanche tragedy in the Himalayas. We've got a Yeti sighting. Stop, you put this as a Yeti? I always call them Bigfoot.
Yeah, I think they're interchangeable to a point. I think the Yeti is the traditional ancient word for the beast, but in modern pop culture, I think it's Bigfoot.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so Yeti Bigfoot sightings, we got a gear review, and we've got a bunch of recent search and rescue news to catch up on. So I'm Mike.
And I'm Stomp. Let's get started.
Let's get started. Yeah, Stomp. So you interjected on my intro there, buddy.
Yeah, it turned into an interview.
Yeah, it did. So, all right. So we're going to go into the hiking buddy spot?
Yeah, let's check it out. They have some good advice, especially with the weather coming up. Diddle-oo, diddle-oo.
Diddle-oo, diddle-oo.
This is Ben Pease from Hiking Buddies. We are a 501c3 nonprofit committed to reducing avoidable tragedies through education, impactful projects, and fostering a community of support. You can find out more at hikingbuddies.org. We wanted to say thank you to those who have supported our mission, and most importantly, say thanks to those who speak up, who ask questions, and who are willing to provide guidance and assistance on the trails when needed. You embody what it means to be a hiking buddy. And now, for all my newer hikers out there, here's this episode's Hiking Buddies Quick Tip.
When planning for your next hike, check out newenglandtrailconditions.com to find some recent submissions by other hikers on trail conditions, terrain, and other notable items from their hike. You can also submit your own hike to let other hikers know what you experienced on trail. This is very helpful both for the hiker and the person reading.
All right, Stomp, good advice from the Hiking Buddies. Matter of fact, I went to a little party with the Hiking Buddies this weekend.
Really? Tell me about it.
Yeah. We went to the Tuckerman Brewing party. I think it's Mountains and Microbrews, they call it. So there was a bunch of hiking buddies there. So we all got together, caught up with a bunch of old friends, and it was good times. It was kind of a rainy, miserable day, so I think that kept some people away, but it was fun.
Was it well attended?
Well attended, yeah. They had a nice tent outside. It was raining, but the tent kept everybody dry, and I saw a bunch of old friends. I saw Jake and Julie there. I saw Mel. I saw Lynn. I saw Ben. I saw
that's great.
The other Julie. So yeah, it was fun.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't make it.
Joanne Hall. I saw Rhonda. There were all kinds of people that, friends of the show.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, hopefully we'll see everybody soon.
Yes, yeah, I think so. There's a couple events coming up, but it was a good time. Tuckerman Brewing, I've never been there before, so it's pretty good. And Stomp, I have a confession.
I think I know what it is.
I ruined Sober October. I had a beer.
Well, come on. I gave you a waiver, right? Last time.
You did. So I was like, Stomp gave me a waiver, so I'm gonna have a beer, but I'm gonna hold strong for the rest of October.
Yeah, how's it going otherwise? I'm enjoying it.
Yeah,
Sober October, that is.
Yeah, it's going well.
Yeah, Mrs. Stomp is doing it too, so the two of us are just clawing at each other. What do we do?
I had to laugh because my father-in-law is heading down to Florida, so he came in. He stays at our place for a couple of nights before he's driving down to Florida, so he brought all the extra stuff that's in the refrigerator, and there was a big box of high noons and some beers in there and some other stuff. So we have so much alcohol at my house right now.
Of course, that's the way it works.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Stomp, we wanted to talk about Friday the 13th. So tomorrow is Friday the 13th. We're coming up on the spooky season. So Stomp wants to know, what are we doing to prepare for Halloween?
Yeah, so when this episode is heard, it will be Friday the 13th. So yeah, anything going on for spooky season? Mrs. Stomp is totally into it. The house is getting decorated with ghosts and pumpkins and all kinds of crazy stuff, and Xylo's having a blast playing with it all. And I'm watching some of the latest movies. Like I saw The Insidious Red Door, and then I just watched The Nun Part 2. Great stuff. So scary.
Yeah, I'm not. The only thing I've been doing is eating candy corn. This is Mike has a bunch of candy corn, so I've been eating that. Every time I go upstairs, I'll like grab a handful of candy corn.
That stuff is the best.
It's the best, but it's also the worst for your teeth. Like I can feel it, like just like the sugar just penetrating my teeth. So I'll like have the candy corn, and then I'll sit there for a half hour. I'll be on a work call or something. I'll be like, I got to go upstairs and brush my teeth. So,
yeah.
But anyway, that's about it for me.
Yeah.
So you like spooky movies. I don't really like spooky movies. I'm sticking with my Hallmark Channel movies, but you know, maybe once in a while I'll watch like some Halloween movie, but not much.
Yeah. That's all good. I mean, I love jump scares and all that stuff. I think it's great.
Yeah, so. We get a little bit of decoration, but not much. I think Mrs. Stomp probably has us beat.
Oh, she's totally into it this year. She's going nuts, buying all kinds of crazy things. We actually have 2 of those big electric inflatable balloons. Like one of them is the character from Hocus Pocus, Bette Midler's character, and then it's a cat, a scary cat. So there was actually inflatable things in the back deck. It's too funny. Hey, why not?
Why not? So I did do a little Halloween thing this weekend. I was walking around Freiburg, Maine. We were getting ready to go to the Freiburg Fair, but I think the day before we just went for like a family walk. We go on the Mountain Division walking trail, and then we walk into downtown Freiburg by Freiburg Academy in that area there. But there was somebody that had must have been like a 16-foot skeleton. I posted it on the Instagram story, and yeah, it's like one of those yard ornaments or yard things. It must have been like, I don't even know, like maybe 15 feet tall. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I got a picture of that.
That's wicked cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Stomp. So we got snow on Mount Washington. We just talked about that. So this is the first measurable snow came through this is 4 days ago. So they got a little over a quarter inch of snow, below freezing temperatures, high winds, and fog. So they experienced rime ice up there as well.
Yep.
And a couple of friends of mine went up there on Monday as well and experienced a little bit of icy conditions. So I don't know if it's time to break out the microspikes yet, but it's getting close.
Well, check it out. I mean, for those of you that protest against the forecast at the beginning of the show and skip over it, the forecast said it's going to be traced to 2 inches. So we are in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Good stuff.
It should be an interesting day tomorrow morning when I get out there.
Yes.
All right. So next up, Stomp, we got a story. This is a sad one. So this is in the world of mountaineering. So 2 American climbers, 2 women, Gina Marie and Anna Guta, they were in a race to be the first American women to scale all 14 8,000 footers, and they were both on their final push on Shishapangma, which is in China as part of the Himalayas, and they were hit by an avalanche. So this is a wild story. So 2 women, they're both racing to be the first person to complete these, all the 8,000 meter peaks. Sorry. And the avalanche hit. Anna was found dead along with her guide, Mingmar Sherpa, while Gina is missing together with her guide. And I believe, Stomp, that after this, have they located Gina, or do they think both of them have passed?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is like that. Remember when we talked about that story on K2 about the guy that had died, and they were all sort of sitting on this really perilous section that's prone to avalanches. Like, it sounds to me like a bunch of people just got hit at the wrong time. They were under the wrong section, and it took a bunch of them out.
Right. I was looking up to see if the other female climber that was doing K2 that got wrapped up in that controversy with the Sherpa was part of this, but she was not.
Yeah, no, I think that she, she's probably taken a break from high mountaineering activities at this point. But yeah, it's interesting. The death toll overall has risen to 4. So just looking at this here, yeah, they're still missing as of a day ago. So, but it, obviously not good. Like, no one's going to survive that area. So
yeah, unlikely.
It's a deadly game up there, Stomp. I don't think. Would you ever do like that high mountain? Would you ever go to like climb these 8,000 meter peaks or hire a guide if you won the lottery and had $1 bajillion? Would that be something you'd spend your money on?
I think I would probably do something like Kilimanjaro or something more moderate or modest, as opposed to these crazy 8Ks up in the glacial regions. I'm just risk averse at this stage of my life.
Yeah, I would probably, like, maybe I'd mess around in the Alps or something, but not, I don't know so much about the Himalayas, so we'll see.
Right.
Great. All right. So now moving on, we've got Fish and Game has issued 2 timely warnings here, Stomp. So occasionally, like in between search and rescue press releases and ATV and snowmobile press releases, they do occasionally, the Fish and Game will put out sort of public service announcements to be aware. So this one here is be prepared, aware, and responsible while exploring this fall and winter. And what they call out is that temperatures are cooling off, the foliage is going to be advancing, and they want to remind visitors to practice safety and responsibility. Even short hikes require awareness, preparation, and self-reliance. Anytime you're going into the woods, you need to be prepared. Don't always rely on GPS mapping or app technology to guide you in remote mountains. Those who practice self-reliance carry maps, a compass, and the knowledge to use both tools. Be sure to bring a flashlight with extra batteries. I always say bring an extra flashlight, or a headlamp, so you have 2. And be aware of your physical limitations, rapidly changing conditions, and unreliable cell service in many of the locations is common. So temperature fluctuations between the trailhead and summit can be significant, and then you've got reduced hours of daylight, and you've got to make sure that you're prepared with light, layers of clothes, warm and dry, extra clothes, accurate maps, and directions.
Correct. And they finished the article with the 10 essentials listed. Mike just mentioned a few. There's also the matches, fire starters, first aid repair kits, whistle, rain, wind jacket, and pants, and a pocket knife.
Yeah. The other thing here that they talk about, Stomp, and this is the hardest one, all hikers, regardless of experience, must know when to turn back. And the difficulty in that one is that unless you've been doing this for a long time, like, you don't know where that line is.
That's right. That comes with experience.
Yeah. So, and some people, maybe it doesn't always come with experience. Some people just have a better sense of like, hey, I'm getting in deep and I'm going to turn around. But it does, a lot of times it does mean that you got to get some experience, and sometimes you take some risks to get that experience.
Sure.
Matter of fact, I'll talk about like my hike on Chikora on Friday to highlight that a little bit when we get to that section.
And the second thing they post here is about wearing blaze orange when heading afield, because we are in hunting season now. It's important on trail, but definitely off trail. Wear something blaze orange so that you're not mistaken for an animal that may be hunted.
True. Wear orange, Stomp.
Yep, that's it.
All right. The next thing we have here, there's a Yeti sighting in Colorado. So, Stomp, here's what I think the difference between Yeti and Bigfoot is Yeti exist in like the Himalayas, and then Bigfoot exists in the North American area. So it's like I don't know. It's like different names for the same thing, but because geographically you just have to call it a Bigfoot. So I'm calling it a Bigfoot.
Sure, I'll give you that. We need a Bigfoot expert on to talk. I know it's controversial, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, didn't we have a guy? What were we gonna? There was a guy. We do.
We have a guy. I just haven't reached out to the guy.
All right. Can we before, usually we reach out to people and we're just like, we just assume that they're normal, but I can't assume that a Bigfoot expert's normal. So we may want to have a conversation with him, or just slow roll it and have a longer email exchange and try to suss out whether he might be a little nutty.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll vet him.
I don't want a stalker or something. But anyway, so Bigfoot was reported. So I don't know. This is on Twitter. So it's probably just it's probably a goof, but, and again, this is just the UFO sightings or ghost sightings, there's never a high definition 4K version of this. Nope. It's always from 20 miles away, or it's through a bag of water that they're filming. This one is,
close.
I don't know.
It's close to that.
It's on a mountain, but it looks is it a drone footage or is this a helicopter?
No, they're people in a train passing by. It's in Colorado.
It's a train. Okay.
Yes.
So this is definitely a goof then, because this would be something. So there needs to be a listener that has to do this to the Cog Railroad, is get yourself a Bigfoot outfit.
For Halloween.
Or whenever, and get a pretty good distance away. You've got to get on... you got to be at least a couple 100 feet away, and then start walking around and wait for it to happen. So what this video is somebody's on a train, they're going up a mountain, and then it's scrub, and this Bigfoot character is walking around, and it's squatting down.
Squatting.
Yeah, it's squatting down on the ground.
And it needs a haircut.
Yeah, and then it gets up again. It's definitely a goof.
Probably. Yeah, it looks fake.
Yes, but anyway, we'll include this in the show notes so you can take a look at it, because he's just walking like a human.
Yeah, it looks so cheesy. But it went viral, of course, as one would expect. But it's funny. I mean, in California, I think they started having sightings in the 50s, and there have been hundreds and hundreds of sightings. I guarantee most of them are fake. But there are some out there that really believe in the etymology of these creatures and the Tibetan connection and everything else. It's wild.
Yeah. We've talked about this before. There's a theory. I forget what it's called. It's the idea is that there was a couple of things that were when hunter-gatherer societies existed. They had some problems where they, the kids, kids are generally pains in the neck and they're going to go running off. So you got to figure out a way to keep the kids in the tent or wherever it is that you're going. Because if not, they're going to get eaten by a wildebeest or a saber-toothed tiger or whatever. So
right.
What they would come up with was these stories of, it wasn't even stories to them. They would see lightning strike, and to them, they're God's coming down to kill us or whatever. So they would come up with these stories to basically just make people fearful so they wouldn't go running off and get killed. So the elders would come up with these stories, and they would sometimes exaggerate the stories probably to just make sure that people were not doing that. So the people that survived over millennia were the ones that were the best at sort of embracing and listening to these stories over generation. If you didn't listen to these stories, you get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So our ancestor stomp were the ones that listened to the story and were I'm going to stay close to my parents, because if not, I'm going to get struck by God or some monster is going to get me. So I feel over time, our genes have been encoded with this idea that we're going to accept the idea that there's monsters, because that's how we survived and made it into the gene pool.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, we all grew up with comments sent our way that impacted us. Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
For our safety.
Anyway, that's my theory about genetically why we like Bigfoot and all those things. So,
yeah.
All right, so moving on, full conditions and Rescue Me update. What's going on here? We have an event coming up on November 11th, right?
Correct. That is the Reckless Full Conditions release. So they are brewing Ty Gagney's Full Conditions beer, which is a benefit for the New Hampshire Outdoor Council. And as far as I know now, it is sold out, but stay tuned. There may be some additional tickets that they're trying to work up, and we'll keep you posted on that. But if you don't make the show, which begins at 2 o'clock for music for an hour, and then the show will be 3 to 5, after 5 o'clock, the doors will open to the public, so you can come on in and have a beer with us and hang out and chat and meet Ty and everybody else. So, again, it's a great benefit, and really looking forward to that. But that morning, the Rescue Me 5K is happening, and our team is up to 17 members now. Which is so cool. Thank you, everybody, for signing up and supporting the Lakes Region Search and Rescue, because the proceeds for this race go to that team to support their efforts with volunteer search and rescue. So I guess the bib pickup is 8:30. The race starts at 10. For those of you on the team, just keep a lookout for a great Tacoma with a pop-up tent with the SLASR logo on it, and we'll all be gathering there and stretching each other's hammies out and, quads and stuff like runners do.
Right. Yeah, I got my daughter. I got the boyfriends coming. I got my daughter's. I got a whole WPI crew coming up, so it should be fun.
Oh, it's going to be a great time.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on. Yeah, super cool.
Very good. Hey, when are we going to get a beer named after ourselves? We're going to talk to Steve.
The catch is it has to be like for a proceed or a charity or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, I could do that. So we could give them a release. They can use it. Anyway, so we're looking forward to it. I'm a little nervous. Live shows, I always freak out, but we're going to script it out. We'll be fine.
Well, hold on a minute. What kind of beer would you want to represent SLASR? Like an IPA or a stout, or what are we thinking?
Yeah, like it would be the most basic IPA that you could imagine.
A hazy? Can we go hazy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, hazy.
All right. I'm in.
Yeah. It would be nothing interesting, just like the most plain IPA you can get. That would fit us perfect.
That's funny.
All right, so Snob, now you got 2 stories of interest on Wednesday's Laconia Daily Sun, but you didn't link them.
I didn't, because I have the paper right here, crinkly.
What is that thing you're holding in your hand?
I saw this. I saw this today at work. It was from Wednesday. It's the Laconia Daily Sun, and these two headlines.
Stomp is holding a paper newspaper. I haven't seen one of those in a long time.
Can you believe this? But look at the 2 stories. I immediately thought of you when I saw these. I thought of you first, and then the podcast. Can you read those headlines?
I can't.
Okay. Well, the first one is high-paid remote workers flock to New Hampshire resort towns. So it's a big bitch fest about all the people that are moving up north doing remotes.
Well, get ready, people. I'm coming up in a couple of years, so you can keep complaining.
So that's the first one. And then the second one was a happy story. It's about Guilford firefighters rescue a dog from an old well. Apparently a dog fell into a well, and the pup was rescued, thankfully, on October 8th. It was a 70-pound dog. So that's a good story. I love it how it's back-to-back, though. It's like high-paid remote workers flock to New Hampshire resort towns, and then a rescue of a pup. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I know that picture looks like it must be the well, but it looks like it looks like that, like the duct cleaning services, like come in and clean your air conditioning ducts. So I would not want to ever be stuck in a well.
No.
So Stump, we got another story coming up, but I forgot. I didn't put this in the script, but I caught this the other day and I posted it on my Facebook or the Facebook page. Black Mountain in Jackson is not opening for the season.
Okay, why?
Which is a shame, yeah. So they're a ski resort. They just said that the cost of energy and short staff, they decided that they're not going to open for the season. So, which is unfortunate because it's a great little mountain. That's where my kids learn to ski. And it's a great sort of a hidden gem, but apparently it's just too hidden.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess you could have seen that coming.
Yeah. Kind of a bummer. I feel like a lot of the ski resorts are struggling, like the small ones are struggling. Like people want to go to these big fancy ones with the fast chair lifts and things like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's tough to beat that, but you're going to pay for it. Yeah,
you sure are. So, okay. So next up here, we got a story. This is hiking related. There was a woman killed in Vermont, 77-year-old, her name was Honoree Fleming. So her body was discovered on October 5th on the Delaware and Hudson Rail Trail around 4:30 p.m. So there was a young man in his 20s, a white man, 5'10", with short red hair, last seen wearing a dark gray T-shirt and carrying a black backpack, that was spotted in the area. So police on the lookout for this character, and the police are continuing to look at like potential evidence as the investigation of the killing continues. So they don't have a lot of details yet. They're doing an autopsy, and they did an autopsy, and they determined that the lady Fleming had died from a gunshot wound to the head, and her death has been ruled a homicide. So this is a pretty wild story. There was a witness that said they heard gunshots and saw a possible suspect walking northbound on the trail. But this is one of those like rail trails that connects, I guess, Vermont and New York, and really scary. So it's Castleton, so it's like Burlington, that area.
Okay. Yeah, I had not heard.
Yeah. And the composite photo of the suspect looks like, he definitely looks guilty in that photo. Mm-hmm. So that's anyway. We'll keep an eye on that one. But pay attention, people, when you're out there, especially the rail trails. They're too accessible. I feel like there's too many shady characters around those rail trails sometimes.
No question.
Are you ready for SLASR's gear review?
All right, Stomp, you got some gear reviews here. What is this all about?
Yeah, SLASR's Gear Talk, because everyone does it better than we do, but no one does it like we do. I found these two things. This popped up.
Wait a minute. Where did that come from? What was that? Nobody does it like we do?
Yeah, well, a lot of podcasts do gear reviews, and they do it so great. So when we first started doing the Gear Talk, it was a spoof. Like we were trying to find, umbrella hats and stupid stuff, but now it's morphing into an actual segment of cool gear. But the original intent in the wording is the same. So the phrase was originally SLASR's Gear Review, because everyone does it better than we do, but no one does it like we do.
All right, I like it. I was like, where did that come from?
Yeah, and it has the the intro music has the cheesy circus music.
But
it's morphing. I keep on finding these really cool things. So I found this. This first one is an all-terrain track chair, and this is basically a power chair for individuals that need a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. And this thing is unbelievable. It's an all-terrain power wheelchair that is customizable to your needs. It has basically like tank treads, and it's motorized, and it can handle mud, sand, snow, water, you name it. You have to check this thing out. It's really amazing.
Wow, they have different sizes. Like, I can't wait to get old and just drive around in one of these badasses.
It's amazing. So people that are looking, the adaptive community, this is a really neat thing. I bet it's not cheap, but it's out there, and the power chair options are expanding and becoming more, I don't know what the word would be, but they're expanding into terrain that you couldn't before.
Yeah. And on the low end, you've got units for like about 14,000, and then on the high end, the most expensive one looks like it's a standing model at 27,000. And then there's a couple that are like in the 20,000 range that look like they are really beastly. Like there's one that has like 5 tracks or 5 wheels with the track, and that's like 16,000. So
Yeah.
Yeah, these are really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Super cool. Yep.
Great. I don't know how great they would be in New Hampshire because of the roots and the rocks and things like that. Like, I don't know if they could totally navigate all the trails, but out west, I mean, those trails for the most part are perfect for this.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah.
Just flatter, more earth than rock.
Okay.
Less bouldery.
It's not really a gear review stomp because you didn't try the actual gear, but it's a gear highlight.
True. It's a gear highlight.
No, back to the drawing board.
Well, this next one I've tried.
Okay. All right. There you go.
Fair enough. So the next one is Liquid Death. Have you heard of this?
I haven't. No.
All right. You might be really fascinated with this. Liquid Death is a water. Just bear with me here on this one. It's hard to swallow at first. Dun-dun-dun. It's water in an aluminum can, but the trick with this is it's artesian well water, and it comes in just either non-carbonated or carbonated. And the company's mission is to actually reduce plastic pollution, toxicity, and to reduce the whole recycling of plastic, which apparently at this point is becoming untenable. So check it out. It's absolutely delicious. I can attest to the artesian water here because we live on an artesian and the water is just phenomenal. So there it is. Liquid Death. It's water and they're murdering your thirst. That's the catchphrase for the water.
And it's the whole thing about the plastic is it's in an aluminum can.
It's in a can, which is permanently recyclable.
Okay.
Yeah. So it looks like one of those.
It's got a cool logo on the can.
Absolutely. Check it out at, say, Walmart and a few other places and give it a shot. The carbonated version is just really, really good. So
yeah, it's got some funny marketing on the website too. It's got like a really like cheap version of the Ice King or whatever his name is from Game of Thrones, like
right.
using his saber to like melt people's faces off. So
yeah. That's great. So that's my gear. I don't know, plug.
Okay, Stomp. Thanks for sharing.
You bet.
All right. Next up, free stickers.
Free stickers. And let's see, we can get them at Ski Fanatics in Campton off of Exit 28 and Spinner's Pizza Parlor off of Dascombe Road in Massachusetts, in Andover. Say hi to Dolls and Pops. You can always advertise with SLASR. Just send us an email at SLASRpodcast@gmail.com. And we have a donation this week, a coffee donation from Buy Me a Coffee. And this is from Mark, that friggin' hiker. And he says, thanks for the shout out. I think you mentioned him last week, Mike.
That friggin' hiker.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark. Much appreciated.
Right.
Beer talk, nothing this week. We have the Sober October going on. And recent hikes. Let's get into your hike, Mike.
Yeah, so I had a failure on Friday night. So I left. I think I bailed out of work at like 4:00 on Friday. So I headed up to Chicora and late on Friday, and I was like, I'll see if I can get up there before sunset, and then I'll just hike down in the dark. So I went up Piper Trail, and then Nickerson Ledge, and then Carter Ledge. But unfortunately, like everything was dry. I was driving up. I got into Tamworth, and it was like a little bit of a sprinkle. Stopped at Subway, grabbed a sandwich for the summit, and then headed up. I feel like I had like about an hour and a half to get to the summit. So I was like, I'll be okay. And I said, even if I get to Three Sisters and I don't get up to the actual Chicora summit and I just come down, that's cool either way. So I started hustling, and it started like drizzling. But Chicora's like it's a pretty thick canopy, so It was kind of raining, but I wasn't getting wet because it was just hitting the trees. So then when I got to the trail junction of Nickerson Ledge, I think is what it's called, or Nickerson Trail or something, I headed up there and then started picking up more. And the visibility started getting foggy. And then I finally got to Carter Ledge. I kept going, and like the rain started like sort of making its way through the canopy, so I was getting a little bit wet. Mm-hmm. Then I got like just below tree line when you start to get to the ledges, it started pouring. And I realized, I was like, all right, well, I don't have my backpack cover with me. So I went into my backpack because I was like, I got to put everything into my trash bag so it doesn't get wet. And I realized like I had emptied my backpack when I went to Yosemite. So I had pulled my trash bag out of my day pack. So I didn't have a trash bag. So I was like, oh man, everything's going to get soaked. So then I realized I had my emergency bivvy with me. So I ended up having to put everything, I had to pull my bivvy out and then like put everything in my bivvy and then like twist that up and then stick it back in my backpack. And I'm getting wet while I'm doing this. I'm like, this stinks. And I started thinking, I was like, well, the ledges are going to be super wet. So sure enough, like I get above tree line and I'm going for like maybe 5 minutes or so. And I went across like the first 2 or 3 ledges and I was like, oh, this is like walking on ice. And then it was like this steady cold rain. And I was in a t-shirt and then I was like, well, let me switch to my raincoat. But then I was thinking, I was like, well, if I keep going, the temperature's dropping. It's cold rain. I was like, I still got another mile to go. So that at that point, I was like, well, if even I get up top, I'm still going to have to keep moving to stay warm or I'm going to freeze to death. And then if I keep moving fast, I'm going to slip. And I'm by myself. There was like no other cars in the parking lot when I got there. So I just was like, you know what? I'm risking enough already by being up on these ledges. So I just turned around at like the second ledge. Matter of fact, that's when I texted you and I was like, I got to bail out because.
Right.
Good. So that's sort of what I was talking about when I say like you have to know that little voice in your head where you have to know when to turn back. And that voice was like screaming when I was up there. Yeah, I was like, yeah, no, this is all bad.
Yeah, sometimes you're itchy to get something accomplished, but you just can't put yourself at that risk.
Yeah, because I hadn't gone hiking in, I don't know how long, like a couple of weeks because I was in Yosemite, so I haven't gone. So I was like, I want to get something in, and I was like, well, maybe I'll get some views on Chicora, but it was just cloudy, and it was the one section Friday night where it was like there was just rain stuck on Chicora. Everywhere else was kind of okay. I would have been better off going to another mountain, but I just was like, it's right on the ride, so that's why I stopped there. I was like, well, see how it is.
Yeah. Well, a good call, especially on that trail.
Yeah. I mean, the ledge there when it's wet is really slick.
Oh, no doubt.
Yep.
Speaking of ledge, we've been seeing a lot of videos about the whole trail, and I've got the itch to do that for sure on Cardigan.
Yeah. Matter of fact, my nephew's upstairs, like they're having a little dinner party up there to say goodbye to my father-in-law, and he was just asking me when we had a little break. He was asking me. He was saying he's going to go to Monadnock, but he didn't want to go, and I was like, "Oh, go to Cardigan."
Yeah, good call.
Yep.
It's going to be beautiful. I mean, the foliage is still cranking. So.
Yep. But other than that, I'm hiking tomorrow. I'm going out into the King Ravine with Knobby Hikes, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, be safe with that. Wind's going to be rowdy. At least you have a ton of bailouts.
Yeah. It's not going to be great, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right, Stomp. Do you have a sweat problem?
Oh, I sure do. But thankfully, there's a solution. Sweat can be extremely uncomfortable on the trails. Plus, sweat is a serious risk factor. As your clothes get wet, your core temperature can dramatically fluctuate. This can result in hypothermia, heat exhaustion, and dehydration. We've got good news at SLASR for you. There's a piece of gear that solves the sweat problem. Vaucluse's ultralight ventilation backpack frame. The frame is a backpack accessory that easily installs in your favorite pack, size 15 liters to 65 liters, and creates a ventilating airflow gap between you and your pack. It's also ultralight, weighing less than a pair of socks at just over 3 ounces. Whether you're hiking in hot or cold temps, the ultralight ventilation backpack frame is a real game changer when it comes to airflow and ventilation. So visit vauclusegear.com to order an ultralight ventilation frame today. Use promo code SLASR, SLASR, to enjoy a $5 discount. Plus, let them know that Mike and Stomp sent you. Wow. Good stuff. And hey, we have a couple notable hikes of the week. If you want to be considered for a notable hike of the week by SLASR, just tag us on your Instagram post and we will put you on the list and give you a shout out. So we have E.C. Banks Hikes, who was our guest just recently for a listener spotlight. He was tackling some more trails out of the guidebook trek in the Pine Mountain Complex, and he says that he's at 67.8%. That's interesting because we have a rescue coming up in the last segment on that Pine Mountain in that complex. I had no idea it existed, so we'll check it out.
Yep.
Snow Angel Cabot via Kilkenny Ridge from the Unknown Pond for number 43. I love Unknown Pond and the bulge in the horn and all that there. That's a great approach to Cabot if you're looking for a new angle to approach that summit. LB Boyd, 4th Connecticut Lake Preserve Trail. And I believe this is the northern tip of the state, part of the Coas Trail. Am I right about that, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful area up there. Very remote, but I think her intention was their intention was to avoid the foliage rush, which was insane, and it's probably going to be bad this weekend too. All right, 2 more. So Liz Fay and Dave Schitz, Millen Trail and Mount Dartmouth. Beautiful pictures. I was unfamiliar with Mount Dartmouth, but I think I'm going to add that to my personal list. Looks great. Hiking Feeds My Soul and Miles the Dog checked off the Kinsmans for the 48. And then actually I saw another one here, Rhonda Willette 68, hiked up Table Mountain, another beauty. And that's what we have.
Very good, Stomp.
Yeah, very good.
Very good. All right, so we are going to get into our segment of the week. So we're joined by our friend Kim Varney Chandler. We're going to talk about covered bridges. So she was nice enough to sit down with us. So let's go into that segment here, Stomp.
Let's go.
SLASR's hiking topic of the week.
All right, so welcome, Kim. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about covered bridges and probably some other topics, so welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Great. So, Stomp, why don't you kick it off and sort of give the listeners a little bit of background about how we connected with Kim?
I think this is a pure Instagram connection. I do not recall if it was us following you, Kim, or vice versa, but we're glad to have made the connection. And it's just another shout out to this little community that we're building, all things New Hampshire and hiking and search and rescue and local interests. So I'm not sure how it happened, but we're glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Great. So, Kim, why don't you start off by giving a little bit of background about yourself, and then we can get into a little bit more detail around the book and the podcast and covered bridges.
Sure. So I have been a high school counselor, believe it or not, for 28 years, and have always been fascinated by history. I'm that person that when you go places, I've done the research and I know things, and I annoy my friends and family with data they didn't want. And my husband, Marshall, and I moved to Hancock in 2012, and there's a covered bridge here. And we travel over it to get, and if you know where Hancock is, which a lot of people don't, to get anywhere, to buy anything, you have to leave town. So if you're going eastward from here, you pass over that covered bridge. And and I'm kind of a list person. I like to make lists. I like to finish lists. So we started feeding birds. I documented the birds. I started hiking. We could talk about that later. Haven't finished that list yet. And decided I was going to photograph all of the covered bridges in the state. So that's kind of how my interest in covered bridges started. And because I'm curious, I started researching the bridges, and along that journey, someone offhandedly said, well, why don't you write a book? And I said, I have no business writing a book. And he said, well, anybody can write a book. So with that high bar, I thought, well, I suppose I could try. So this journey for me happened by accident, and it's been another full-time job for me, which I really enjoy.
Now, did you have any other sort of niche history interests before you got into covered bridges?
Yes, I've traced my husband's and my family tree, which if you've ever gotten into that, it's a giant rabbit hole. And I've done that for forever. I've researched some of my friends' family trees. And I've always been fascinated with the history of where we've lived. So I've always researched property deeds and tried to know more about the different communities that we've been a part of.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it almost doesn't matter what the hook is, but like I find like trail names and mountain names, like I'm a place name nut now, and I'm sure that like with covered bridges, you probably uncover a lot of interesting characters that are involved in the building of these, and we'll get into that for sure. But history is interesting. I guess what are some of the biggest surprises you've learned about covered bridges since you've gotten into this?
Well, one of the things that I've learned is that a covered bridge doesn't have to have a roof on it, which was news to me. And I've also been very surprised by the community connections and the community commitment to keeping and, in some instances, rebuilding their covered bridges after they've been lost. And a lot of the communities that have covered bridges that own them are very small communities, and some of them have multiple bridges. And the money and the effort that they spend to raise the money is a huge testament to what covered bridges mean to New Hampshire.
Yeah, and as far as the overall, so you're obviously like one of the keepers of knowledge with the book, and you have a podcast as well that covers the topic. But is there like a single organization that's responsible for maintaining the historical records for covered bridges?
Yes, there is. So the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges is a national group. They coincidentally are housed in Hillsborough because the president, Bill Caswell, lives there. And most of their meetings are local to me, and if not, they're within the greater New England area. And they were founded in 1950. And they advocate for the preservation of bridges. And they're a total volunteer group. A lot of the board members, it's another full-time job for them. They hold monthly meetings. They produce a quarterly journal, and they produce the World Guide to Covered Bridges, which lists all of the covered bridges in the world.
And they must serve as I'm assuming they have some historical archives as well. Oh,
yes, they do. Thank you for mentioning that. They have the largest repository of covered bridge documents and photos, most of which they graciously shared with me for this book. And my partnership with them was really fortunate for me, because without Bill's help and Scott Wagner and others in the group, they helped me with my chapters. They taught me a lot about bridge language that was not my first language. So I am very grateful to all of them for their help.
Well, I want to go back in time in a minute, but before we get to some additional history, can you talk a little bit about your hiking background? I mean, we're primarily hiking and search and rescue. So,
yes.
Why don't you give us a little bit of rundown? Have you gotten into hiking recently, or have you always been an outdoors person?
Well, so my husband Marshall finished his first round of the 48 on Bond Cliff in 2013, and that was my first 4,000 footer.
Oh, good for you.
So he dragged you all the way out to Bond Cliff.
That's a long day.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And there was a group of us, and my cousin Tracy, you interviewed her not too long ago with Captain Chris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
cool. That's a connection. All right.
Yeah,
so they're hiking royalty. So that's cool.
Yes. Chris wasn't on this trip, but poor Tracy, she's hiked with me a couple of times, and I am slow. But I've done a few. In 2020, we got hot on it again, and I got up to 10, and then I started this project. So unless there's a covered bridge on a summit somewhere, I'm not not going to be able to.
We're going to have to start building some.
Yeah.
So what do you remember back when you got out to Bond? So I can only imagine like just taking somebody out to Bond Cliff that hasn't hiked a lot. Like it's got to go in two directions. You're either going to go out there and be like, this is the most magical place ever, or you're going to be like, this is the worst day of my life.
18 miles.
I alternated between both of those feelings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we when we got there was a group of us and another friend of ours, Mitch, came, and Mitch had not hiked much either, and we were in the parking lot, and he said, "I can't wait for that cheeseburger we're having when we're done." So that kind of kept me going, but it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Well, hopefully this appearing on the show will get you the bug, and you'll want to knock off some more of those 4,000 footers.
I have 38 more to go. Please don't play the shame thing on me.
No, we won't. We'll just encourage you. But all right, Kim. So let's go back in time to the early 1800s. Can you give us a little bit of a view of sort of the time period? Talk a little bit about the settlers that organized in those communities, and just the general role of transportation in northern New England and New Hampshire, and how these bridges sort of play into that.
Sure. So, the seacoast region was obviously settled first, in that their commerce was built around sawmills and shipyards and merchants. And in the central and western part of the state, where I am, a lot of people moved to have their own farms, and a lot of those communities were built around a sawmill or a grist mill. So they were usually located around a water source of some kind. And obviously they were using horse and buggy and wagons, and traveling was really hard. The roads were not well cared for, and a lot of people didn't really leave their greater community very often. But by the late 1800s, when the railroad really took over and changed the way people travel, obviously the North Country started logging, and that changed a lot of, and really grew a lot of those northern New Hampshire communities. Most people would initially cross rivers and streams by fording, or they would wait until it was frozen, and that was usually quite a gamble. Yeah. And there were some earlier bridges that I've seen through the research. They were just crudely built. They weren't particularly safe. And a lot of the larger river crossings usually use ferries. So, and ferries were probably safer than trying to go across the ice. But if you're trying to move cattle from, one side of the state to the other, or one side of the river to the other, that's not really handy to put a lot of cows on a ferry. And when the railroad came, that really shaped a lot. And there were hundreds of railroad covered bridges along the railroads here. And but the first covered bridge that we know to have been built in the U.S. was built by a gentleman from Massachusetts named Timothy Palmer, and that bridge was open to traffic in Philly, actually, in 1805, and that's the first documented covered bridge. Mm-hmm. And it was such a large bridge, and at the time, it was a $300,000 project.
Oh, so it'd be like the equivalent of, in the tens of millions now, right?
Yes, and because it cost so much, they decided that they would cover it to protect it. It was two different spans. One was 150 feet long, and the other was 195 feet long, and that was really the first one that we know was built. That's not to say there may not have been another covered bridge built somewhere else, but that's certainly the one that's referenced. And over time, other communities would start to build smaller covered bridges within their own communities, and certainly a lot of the original Connecticut River crossings were covered. And it just because the definition of a covered bridge is that the trusses are covered, and you want to protect the wood as much as possible. So,
gotcha.
If you cover it, it will last over 100 years if it's cared for properly. And if not, it'll only last about 20.
So I think a lot of people think in terms of a covered bridge is simply like they define it as there's a roof. But that's not the case. You're talking about covering the actual support structure on the sides as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Interesting. And then when these settlements grew up, so essentially they had a number of different priorities when they had these communities building up. They'd have to build a schoolhouse. They would typically have to build a church. And then right along that, I would assume the same group of people that are building the churches and the schoolhouses are also looking at any major river crossings and determining, where they might be able to place a covered bridge. Is there any, in your historical research, do you have any sense on how they would go about picking a specific location? Would it just be proximity to the village, or would they have to look for certain characteristics on either side?
I think it probably has to do with both. One example is is Campton's Blair Bridge. People would cross the river. They would just ford across. They would go across the ice, and in the 1820s, they built a church on the other side of the river. And so people wanted to commute there. And they had just hired a local doctor from Dartmouth, and he was crossing on the ice in the wintertime, and his horse fell through, and he fell through, and the horse drowned. He made it. But you don't want to lose your brand new doctor from Dartmouth. So that prompted the community to raise the funds to build the first bridge there. So,
In these early bridges, obviously they were probably somewhat crude, but can you talk about at what point did the knowledge of bridge building, and particularly like covered bridges and the components of it, get to the point where there was, I guess, experts that were available to go around, or was it always just mostly people relying on carpentry skills within the villages?
I think it also depends on which community you're in. There are a lot of existing covered bridges that were built by local timber framers, carpenters. There are also covered bridges that followed the first patent was the 1820 Town Truss patent, and it was patented by a Connecticut gentleman named Ithiel Town, and that patent uses smaller timbers. It's that lattice, the town lattice truss. It looks like garden lattice. If you can, it's hard. This is hard for me to do without my photos. but that patent allowed communities to purchase the patent, and you could purchase it for $1 a foot if you asked to use it, or $2 a foot if they found out that you used it without asking. And it allowed communities to use lighter timbers than what other bridge designs called for, and it also allowed unskilled workers to work to build those bridges. So towns didn't have to hire somebody who was skilled to come in necessarily. And then following that, there were several other bridge truss designs that were patented. There was the long truss in 1830 and the Howe truss in 1840. So if and depending on which community you were in, you may hire someone to come in to build it for you, or you may have someone local build it for you.
Okay. And I don't know, I don't have an engineering background, and
I don't either.
So, all right. So, I mean, I guess within your depth of knowledge, can you just briefly explain as best you know about sort of the engineering, and how exactly do these relatively long spans, are they set up? How are they enabled to carry the load?
So we talked about a truss earlier, and the truss it's a series of triangles that, when they're connected, enable the even distribution of weight and the handling of compression and tension. So the truss is the parts of the covered bridge on the side that you see, and typically they're connected to an upper cord especially if there's a roof, and connected to the bottom cord, and those triangles support the weight. Some covered bridges you'll see have added arches inside that help support the weight or load of the bridge.
Okay. And then when it comes to maintaining these, I'm assuming that the people that are looking at that, they're looking to see that the weight is evenly distributed across the trusses, so they can sort of test out the tension on them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the long and short of it. Yeah.
Interesting. So, Stomp, I don't know how much of an engineering background you have, but some of these bridges are pretty long.
Yeah.
Which is interesting how they can hold that much weight.
Yeah, it's impressive. I'm also very impressed by the foundations. You mentioned the Blair Bridge, and that's a bridge that we typically see when we're floating the Pemi during the summer. And it just strikes me as incredible, the size of the stones that are supporting either side, as the land meets the water. It's amazing. You can tell that it was built hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, and if you look at those stones really closely, so that the original bridge I think was built in 1824, and it was destroyed by an arsonist in 1869, and you can see the cracks in the stones from the 1869 fire.
Really? Wow. See, this is really neat because a lot of our listeners, they hike, but they may not have noticed that they're crossing over so many of these bridges. Like, for instance, going into Jackson, New Hampshire, you're crossing that covered bridge, or the Blair. There are so many of these bridges around, and sometimes we don't think of the history behind them.
Right. And that's something I had never really thought about either. And I hope that, people will stop and think about it, because New Hampshire at one time had probably over 350 covered bridges. And now we have about 70 authentic covered bridges, and 46 of them are over 100 years old. And they're still standing there because of the engineers and the bridge rights and the timber framers and the local community who have remained committed not only to fund the work, but to fix the bridge properly and try to keep it as authentic as they possibly can.
Is there are you aware of any sort of famous failures or bridge collapses that have happened with covered bridges?
Well, I thought about that a lot when you sent me the question. Most of the bridge collapses that I'm aware of are from weather or from arson. Arson is still the number one cause of loss of covered bridges today.
Yeah. It's like a big target. I would assume somebody wants to send a message, or somebody has that sort of that arson affliction like that. That's just a tempting target for them, unfortunately.
There was in Swansea has 4 covered bridges, and the first one, there was a bridge in, it was built, I'm not sure when the original one was built, but in 1842, there was a local man driving his wagon train through the bridge, and the bridge collapsed. And he lived, and he actually sued the town of Swansea for damages. And 20 years later, they built another slate bridge, and that one was definitely covered. And that one was destroyed by arson in 1993, and it was rebuilt in 2001.
It seems like I've read a number of different cases of arson, and then obviously there's nowadays, like, those bridges weren't always set up for modern vehicles, so especially these big giant trucks that come through. So I'm assuming that they probably get some damage from vehicles now. Constantly,
and I just can't wrap my head around it. Clearly, if you're driving an oversized vehicle, you should be able to read and read the height sign that is clearly posted.
Well, that brings up the question. EVs are extraordinarily heavy. Has there been talk in the bridge community about the impact of EV cars?
I haven't heard.
Interesting. Yeah, you might want to keep an ear out for that, because problems are popping up across the nation just with overweighted. They're extremely heavy, so you're running into situations where parking garages aren't rated for the weight of the cars, and they're having structural issues. So I would assume it would translate to bridges as well.
Oh, I haven't heard of that. I do wish that Google Maps would come up with some type of alert when you're approaching a covered bridge, because so many of the people that get caught, the ones that actually get caught for going through the bridges, will say that they were just following what their GPS told them to do.
Yeah, we run into that too with people that are trying to go through, like, the seasonal roads. They get directed through the wrong areas. So
yes.
It's interesting. But there is a number of covered bridges in the White Mountains. So you sent us over some chapters to preview, but there's 3, I believe. Three that you had called out. So there's in the Flume Gorge, there's Sentinel Pine, and then there's the Clark's covered bridge. Can you talk a little bit about those 3?
Sure. So if you go into the Flume the Flume State Park, there are 2 covered bridges there. One is the Flume Bridge, which is pictured everywhere. It's a beautiful red bridge, and the bridge has been, there's not a lot of, first of all, sometimes there are really excellent records on covered bridges, and that made me so happy. I would show up at a town, or I'd reach out to somebody and they would say, here's all of our documents, have at it. Sometimes people just didn't keep track. And the Flume Bridge was a perfect example of that. There are not a lot of records to be found. It was private property for a while before it was sold to the state. And so there aren't a lot of records. Some records will say it was built in 1871, and the sign on the bridge says 1886, but there's still no proof of that. Whatever was there, if it was there, and there was a bridge there, I'm sure whatever it was damaged by the flume slide in 1883. So I'm assuming 1886 is probably the proper date for that bridge.
And I actually have a question on this, and it's not related to the flume-covered bridge, but most of the bridges, like I picture like sort of the iconic red and white, red color with the white trim. Has that always been the case that these bridges have been painted that color, or is that just a couple of the more famous bridges like that? So I just have a bias thinking that they're all red and white.
Well, people do think that. I don't think so. I know that the Jackson Bridge for a long time has been, or the Honeymoon Bridge, but in Jackson they prefer you to call it the Jackson Bridge, has been red for a while. But a lot of bridges are actually white, and some of them are just natural wood, so it really depends. They're all very different if you go across the state and see them all, which you should.
Mm-hmm. I know it's sort of like I'm going to pay more attention now, I promise. But you appreciate them when you go over them, but a lot of times you're driving by and you're like, oh yeah, it's just part of the landscape. But you have to stop.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the one neat thing too about the Flume Bridge, it uses what's called a Paddleford truss, and the Paddleford truss was was created by a gentleman named Peter Paddleford from Littleton. And that Paddleford truss really dominated covered bridge building in that northern part of New Hampshire over into Maine. And there were only 22 Paddleford truss covered bridges left.
And is it the technique? It looks like he's got, I don't know what they are, 4x6s or something like that, but they're straight up, and then he's got basically a V cutting across those. Is that his truss style? Yeah,
it's a variant of the long truss, which was a patented truss design, and there's been a lot of back and forth about whether Paddleford tried to patent his truss. Some people say he was challenged in court by Long, but there's no evidence to that. But he, a lot of people in the covered bridge community don't think he even wanted to have a patent because it didn't matter to him. But he worked with Charles Broughton from Conway and Jacob Barry and his son Jacob Barry, also from Conway, and they used the Paddleford truss in almost every bridge that they built. So.
In Sentinel Pine, can you talk about that bridge?
Yeah, so the Sentinel Pine Bridge is really neat. It was named after the Sentinel Pine, which was a 175-foot tall, 16 feet in diameter pine tree that stood over the pool at the Flume. And in the hurricane of 1939, the Sentinel Pine fell, and the White Mountain, the White Mountain Forest.
Forest Service
yes, thank you.
Yeah,
they decided to use the tree to cross the pool, so they sectioned it off and built. Yeah, they sectioned off a 60-foot piece of the tree, and they laid it over the Pemi, and they used other parts of the blown down tree to build the rest of the bridge. And if you're there and you crawl underneath it, which I don't know if you're supposed to, but someone I know may have done that, you can see the pine, and it's really neat to look at it and see it there. It's been reinforced over the years.
Wow, that's neat history.
And this is a pretty iconic photo spot, right? Because it's sort of over a little waterfall, and when the foliage hits, it looks like you get a pretty good view of it from a side angle.
Yep, you do. And I was actually out there this winter with Tracy and Captain Chris, and there were people ice climbing, so we got to watch that, which was really neat.
It's a neat spot.
And then the Clark's, do you call it the Clark's Trading Post Bridge, or do you just call it the Clark's Bridge?
Well, it's called Clark's Bridge.
Okay.
But yeah, because Clark's Trading Post is now Clark's Bears.
Oh, true, yeah.
So.
This is a crazy story. So this is a bridge that was in one location and then disassembled by the Clark family and then reinstalled in their amusement park or whatever you want to call
train,
it.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the bridge was originally built in 1904 in Barrie, Vermont, and it was part of the Barrie Railroad line. And when that line was discontinued in early 1960, the bridge was purchased by a private person, and the Clarks brothers really wanted to bring the White Mountain Railroad to their property. So they approached this gentleman, and they bought the bridge in 1963 for the body of a 1919 Ford Model T touring car and $1,000. And
it's a pretty good deal.
You think?
Yeah.
And and so they went out and they disassembled this 120-foot railroad bridge in the winter, I might add. They took it apart piece by piece, and they numbered every piece, and they brought it back to Clark's. And they also constructed the abutments from granite blocks that were taken from a Maine Central Railroad river crossing. So they took those apart too, brought them back to Clark's, numbered them, put them up. And so it took them a year to put the bridge back together. And this is my favorite. They called it playing bridge. It's the best story ever.
This is an amazing bridge, and this is an example. So the Flume Bridge is exposed trusses that have, they have a roof over them protecting them, but from the side they're not as protected. Mm-hmm. This bridge with the train bridge, the trusses are fully encased by wood. Do you find, is it traditionally the case that like the fully encased bridges tend to last longer, or does that not make a difference? It's more location.
I think it depends on how the weather comes into the bridge. There are several bridges that are open or have partial openings, and typically you'll see that on one side of the bridge or the other. But every bridge is different. Most of the railroad bridges, these through truss bridges that I've seen are mostly fully sided. And Clark's Bridge is special. It's the only active covered railroad bridge still in use in the world.
Wow. And I can only imagine so they did this in the 1960s where they disassembled it, they manually numbered everything, and then had to, figure out how they were going to put the footings in, but then they just rebuilt it. I can only imagine, did they have a warehouse, or is there any pictures of the bridge disassembled in the archives?
Yes. Actually, Clark's has a fabulous book that they've put together about the whole process. So it has a lot of photos and really great stories.
Wow. Any interesting characters? So we talked about the Clarks, but is there any interesting characters in New Hampshire history tied to covered bridges?
I don't know about characters necessarily, but I have done, still doing research on the namesakes of the covered bridges. And so there's a covered bridge in Warner called the Dalton Bridge, and it's unique in that it's the only covered bridge in the state named after a woman. She was a widow. She was widowed twice, actually. And she purchased her own property in 1853 when the bridge was built. So every reference in the old record says built the bridge near the widow Dalton. And it was pretty rare for a woman to own property then. And I think that's really special. And the Durgan Bridge in Sandwich is named after James Durgan and his wife, Jane Hersey Varney, who's no relation to me, but I wish she was. And they were an Underground Railroad stop.
Oh, wow.
So that's
Interesting.
kind of a fascinating story. Yeah.
So Stomp is like he's on the 93 side of New Hampshire, where I'm on Route 16 side of New Hampshire when I travel. So I'm a North Conway person. He's more of a Lincoln person. So he's got like the Campton area. But for me, the Albany Bridge is the bridge. Well, Jackson too, but the Albany Bridge is the covered bridge when I think of it.
Yeah.
So I go up over there quite a bit, hiking and just driving up the Kank and whatnot. So can you talk about the Albany Bridge is interesting because I've definitely seen like graffiti in there. I've seen cars hit it. I've seen, I've seen it be like shut down because of issues and things like that. But the maintenance on that, the amount of traffic that goes over that, I would think that of all the covered bridges, that's got to be one of the covered bridges in the state that gets the most vehicle traffic.
I'm not sure about that. I think I would. There are a lot of really active vehicle traffic bridges, and if you haven't been to the Cornish-Windsor Bridge, you should. It's still a 2-lane bridge that crosses the Connecticut River. It's 460 feet long, and there's a lot of traffic there.
Okay, all right. So I may be showing my bias of where I spend time. So
yeah, but no, it's been hit multiple times, and keeping people with spray paint cans off of covered bridges seems to be a problem.
Yes,
everywhere.
It certainly does. So, and I read the chapter in the book about the Albany Bridge, and it's interesting, sort of the political squabbling around, sort of ownership and responsibility for maintenance. There's a lot of sort of back and forth about, whether the specific town that the bridge is in is responsible, whether the New Hampshire Highway Department, whether the Forest Service is responsible. So a lot of politics back and forth about sort of the maintenance and responsibility. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like at the end of the day, if they can't figure out who has guardianship over a bridge, how does that work?
Well, in this case, they seem to have worked it out over time. But again, it was kind of like just good faith. The bridge needed work, and either the town would work on it or the Forest Service worked on it. And so again, there aren't a lot of records. But when push came to shove in the early 90s, because the bridge needed hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work. So they took it to a town vote, and some people in the town wanted to give ownership of that Dugway Road and the bridge over to the Forest Service, and they had a vote, and it failed. 21 yes to 41 no. So
yeah, they don't want to give anything up to the government.
No,
right?
No, they don't. But since then, they've managed to partner together to work on the bridge, and bridges that are owned by towns and that carry traffic can apply for state bridge aid, and that's a program that's been in effect since 1953, and it offers communities 80% funding for bridge work, and that Albany Bridge did see some work that was funded through that process.
Okay. Are there any covered bridges that have been disassembled and then reassembled in like somebody's yard or just moved privately? Are you aware of?
Somebody's yard? I don't know. Well, I do know that Dover had a covered bridge, and It was in their kind of downtown area. They sold it for $1 to the town of Belmont, and now Belmont has it on their rail trail.
Oh, one comes to mind.
Yeah.
On 302, there's that. I'm sorry. There's that bridge as you're heading past Bartlett or before Bartlett, and it's a tourist store. Yeah, it's a store.
Yeah. So that it's the Bartlett Bridge, and it was built in the 1870s. And when they bypassed the road, which thankfully they bypassed the road and didn't just tear the bridge down, which happened a lot. The town of Bartlett tried to get rid of the bridge for a very long time. They tried to sell it. Nobody wanted it. They used it for storage. And a woman, she was a needlepoint seamstress craftsman, and she lived next door, and she wanted a gift shop. So she hired Milton and Arnold Grayton, who are Milton has since passed, but they really made a huge dent in how we preserve covered bridges in the state. Arnold is an amazing he's the most premier bridge wright in the world, and he lives here in New Hampshire, and we're very proud. But they built a gift shop, and they fixed the bridge. They put the gift shop in it, and it's still there today.
Yeah. All right. So then, for the listeners that aren't aware of this, so this is on 302 as you leave, heading towards Jackson, but you stay on 302 like you're going to go up towards Sawyer River Road. So before you get to Attitash, it's on the right-hand side. And, I actually wasn't sure. I was going to ask you about that too, but Stomp brought it up. But I didn't know if that was just like a faux covered bridge, but that's a real covered bridge.
It's a real covered bridge.
Well, yeah, because I've been in there a couple of times. I'm going to go back in there now. And the person that owns that, he's like the main bridge wright person?
He worked on it. Yeah, he doesn't own it. Yeah. Yeah, okay. The people that own the bed and breakfast next door own the bridge.
Yeah, I've stayed at that place. Yeah, it's a really nice bed and breakfast.
It is. Yeah, and I think there are 4 other covered bridges that are privately owned in the state. Campton has one called Turkey Jim's Bridge, which is on the Branch Brook campground. And that bridge was named after a gentleman who had a turkey farm there, and his name was Jim Cummings. So that's where the name comes from.
That's really cool. There's some other ones that come to mind too. So I think of there are a couple in Haverhill or North Haverhill heading over to Vermont. I would assume anything crossing over the Connecticut is pretty sturdy and covered. How many bridges span the length of the Connecticut between New Hampshire and Vermont? Do you have any idea?
I do. So there's the Cornish Windsor. I do. There's the Cornish Windsor that we mentioned.
That's a stupid question.
No, it's not at all. There's the Mount Orne Bridge in Lancaster, and there's the Columbia Bridge in Columbia, and then one of the Pittsburgh bridges crosses the Connecticut River. See, I guess I don't know.
No.
But one of them crosses.
Yeah.
In all these bridges, you've got chapters about all these bridges in your book.
I do.
So every bridge in New Hampshire is covered with a chapter.
I see what you did there. Every bridge that has a number is covered in the book.
Okay.
And so there are 58 covered bridges that have a number in the state, and the numbering system started in the 1950s. There was a Covered Bridges of New Hampshire Association, which doesn't exist, and they put out a book with beautiful sketches and very short bios of the bridges, but they numbered them in kind of a driving order, starting in where I live over here in the southwestern part of the state, and then they numbered them kind of as if you were going to drive around. Over time, there have been other bridges added, so the numbers don't take you on that route necessarily. But I stopped with the bridges that were numbered, and then I included the 3 boxed pony bridges in the book. But there are 7 or 8 more that I could have included, but I had to stop somewhere.
I have so many. Like I know they're always in the periphery of my vision. Like for instance, the bridge south of Conway, the Conway Scenic Railroad. That's covered, right?
Isn't that the
Saco?
Bridge? Well, there's the Saco River Bridge. Yep. And there's the Swift River Bridge.
So, where you're on Route 16, you have to bank that left to go towards North Conway or Conway. Yeah. It's right to the left.
Oh, that one.
Because
because you can only go one way, and I always I'll go when I'm not supposed to go, and someone gets mad at me, and I go, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Hey, how about Stark? Stark has a bridge too.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that's a beauty.
Yep, they claim to be the most photographed covered bridge in the state.
Oh, I bet. With that cliff in the background.
Probably is.
So, Kim, let me ask you this. I'm curious. So, this is a very niche hobby, but, like hiking, we always have drama between is there any drama between, the covered bridge experts, or are you guys all pretty friendly? It's going to be like a small community. So
You want me to answer that?
I don't know. So like so I'll tell you a story here.
Okay.
I'll tell you. So my uncle, Bob McLaughlin, he is into old amusement parks. So he's written books about Pleasure Island, which was an amusement park in Wakefield. And there's another one in New York. So the guy that designed Disneyland for Walt Disney came to Massachusetts and created another amusement park in the 50s through the 60s. And then he did another one in New York. So my uncle is like the expert who like wrote the books about the history of these parks. But I feel like there's some drama in his little community. So I didn't know if there was drama in yours, but
Well, I think there's drama in every community, right? And
Oh, yeah.
But I think some of the big conversations that I've had with people is around how we repair authentic covered bridges, and and there are people who feel very strongly, and rightfully so, that we should use as authentic methods as we possibly can to preserve the craftsmanship.
okay.
And sometimes communities either can't afford that or they choose not to afford that. And they'll use, they'll put steel beams under the bridge to hold it up. They'll use glue lam timbers, which is not, what you should be using, perhaps, depending on how you feel about it. So sometimes communities have to compromise to save their covered bridge, but it's no longer an authentic covered bridge.
Okay, yeah, because that's common. Like I live in the, I'm in Massachusetts, but I'm sort of in the, Seacoast District, Amesbury, Newburyport. And there's a lot of historical homes and there's historical societies. So there's only certain things you can do with the houses that are deemed historic. So I would assume some towns may deem the bridges as historic and they want to go by certain rules, and then others may not care as much. So.
Right, and if you're using federal funding, which there isn't any now, but there used to be, there are standards that you have to adhere to if you're restoring an historic covered bridge. So, and that that changes things. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of red tape, but it's to ensure that the bridge is fixed properly.
Okay.
And that's important.
Does New Hampshire, and I know they have all kinds of different like themes for license plates and things like that. Does New Hampshire do a good job as far as sort of marketing the history of covered bridges in their own brand? Like the old man on the mountain's all over the place, but do they use covered bridges in that way?
I think so.
Okay.
When I started this journey, I started to think, well, when did I become aware of covered bridges? And really it was, I thought about going to Clark's Bears and going into the gift shop and just wanting everything. I want every pennant. I want every T-shirt. I want every coin purse that, I didn't get. But there were covered bridges on them. There were covered bridges. There are moose. There are bears. There are, the old man, of course. And I feel New Hampshire does a good job of using covered bridges as part of their marketing to entice people to come.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, so now you said you were afraid you were going to get the shame drop. So I'm going to ask you a question here where you may get the shame drop. So you're in New Hampshire, you're the covered bridge expert, and you don't have to say the specific. If you do have this, you don't have to say the specific thing because I don't want to out you. But are you really the covered bridge expert in New Hampshire if you don't have a New Hampshire vanity plate that's a bridge-themed vanity plate?
Well, I have a covered bridge vanity plate from 1974.
Okay.
In my house.
Ooh,
This is not on my car.
Okay, all right. But I feel that you could have like the, CVR, BRG or something.
Well, no, listen, I have my dog on my plate, and her name is Pemi. So,
wait a minute. Do you have Pemi on that's your vanity plate?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, that's, okay, there's no shame
So there's
on that.
no shame now, thank you.
Wow. How long have you had that plate for?
I've had it for about 6 years.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was available?
It's Pemi Dash.
Oh, got it. All right.
Because somebody out there has Pemi, which they could give to me if they'd like.
All right. So you don't get the shame drop.
Thank you.
So, where can we get your book? Where can we listen to your podcast? What do you want to plug?
Yeah, so what do I want to plug? So you can go on the website. It's coveredbridgesnh.com, and you can buy the book directly from me if you'd like to. You can buy it from local bookstores. It's available in almost every local bookstore in the state. If you want to buy it from Amazon, you can.
You don't get as much money, we'll try to do it direct.
No, I do not. Yeah, I was fortunate to publish the book through Peter E. Randall Publisher in Portsmouth. Deirdre Randall was my publisher. She was a genius. I spent 2 years sitting on my couch with my laptop writing on a Word document, and she sent me back this beautiful book. I just couldn't even believe it. And so it's a self-funded book. So you can buy it any way that makes you happy, but I would prefer to support a local bookstore.
Yeah, and I'll put all the links in our show notes so that the listeners can check it out, and we'll make sure that we post some stuff on our socials as well.
Great. Yeah, and I'm out and about. I'm doing programs, it seems, all the time. So
that's great.
If anyone wants to listen to me talk some more, they can do that in person. And I also do have a podcast. It's not as cool as yours, but
so what's the handle on Instagram again?
Covered Bridges of New Hampshire.
There we go. Yeah. You're out and about for sure.
I am. And Pemi has her own Instagram if you want to follow her.
Ooh, I will. What's her handle?
Pemi the hiking therapy dog.
Okay.
Because that's what she is.
That's great. What kind of dog is it?
She's a chocolate.
Okay. Awesome. I will check that out. And then, so thank you so much for joining us. You're a podcaster expert, so hopefully we were professional.
I am not an expert. I'm in my living room. Okay.
I'm the laundry room's right next to me.
I'm in my basement.
I am not an expert. But I love podcasts. I'm a podcast junkie, and I really enjoy listening to you guys. So
that's great. Thank you.
Then thank you so much for joining us, and we're definitely going to continue reading more about the book, and we'll make sure that now that when the listeners get out there and they're driving around, we're all going to be looking at the covered bridges.
Excellent.
We're not just going to like have them to the side of our eyes. So.
Excellent. That's what I hope. And don't hit them if you're driving a big truck.
True. Good point.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
You bet.
All right, thanks. All right, Stomp. So now that we are driving around New Hampshire, we're going to be paying much better attention to the covered bridges situation, right?
Yeah, who knew? I mean, I knew about the big ones like Flume Gorge. I mean, as a hiker, Flume Gorge bridges are beautiful. Blair Bridge and a few others, but they're everywhere. You just have to keep your eyes open and they will arrive.
Yeah. I was looking at some of the pictures as I was talking to Kim too, and I even mentioned this when I was talking to her about like how I always think they're all supposed to be red and white, but there is a lot of them that are sort of just weathered or they're white only. So it's it's a great feature living in New Hampshire that you've got all those bridges.
You know, another one that came to mind after we parted ways on that talk was the bridge behind Shillings in Littleton. There's a huge covered bridge right there. I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah, they are. So
good stuff. So thank you,
Kim. Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope that everybody enjoyed listening to it.
Yeah, it was awesome.
All right, Stomp. So now we're going to get into recent search and rescue news. We haven't covered this, so I think we skipped a week or two. So we got some news here. So the first one, we want to give a shout out to our friend Corey Outdoors. He has given us a story about someone getting stuck in a trailhead toilet. So
not the first.
Yeah, so I didn't read this one ahead of time, Stomp. So is this a case of somebody getting stuck inside the actual part that you use, or is this just somebody getting stuck inside a door?
They got stuck inside the actual privy.
Oh, no. Okay, so here we go. Outside Magazine had this. So it happened again, reminiscent of a similar story from May 2022. On Tuesday, September 19th, the rescue personnel from Otsego County, Michigan, received a call from a visitor at the Dixon Lake boat launch, a recreational area. So immediately when I hear boat launch, like there had to be alcohol involved. So it's about an hour south of Sheboygan. So the incident report said a woman was stuck at the bottom of an outhouse and was screaming for help. I mean, that's just assumed. I'd be screaming for help too.
How the heck does that happen?
A lot of alcohol stuff. These boaters are out of control. Trust me.
Wow.
If any listeners are into boating, like just confirm my theory that like there's a lot of alcohol going on there.
Unless you're like an ectomorph or something.
Yeah. I mean, I do once a year. I go out in the boat, and like I don't drink when I'm driving, but there's a lot of alcohol going on. So crews from 3 different agencies arrived about 30 minutes after the initial call. So she's up to her elbows, and you know what, for 30 minutes, and they came and hoisted her out. She later told officers that she was attempting to fetch her Apple Watch from the depths of the toilet when she lost her balance and fell into the mountain of poo and pee at the bottom.
That's an Augustus gloop.
It's an Augustus gloop, yep.
Yeah, like hands down. Wow.
Can I tell you, like when I go into these outhouses, like the iron grip I have on my phone and like double checking my watches and like nothing that could fall goes anywhere near that toilet.
Augustus poop.
Yeah, Augustus poop. So then I'm done.
Wow. Thanks, Corey.
That's a great one.
Always quality links.
Yeah, you know, I gotta look up that story again about the guy that like his kink was going into the outhouses and like just sitting inside of them while people do their business. Like there was a story in Maine about a guy that was into that. So
yeah, I think we'll be canceled if we cover that one.
Yeah, well, I think we have covered it before, but it's a wild story. But anyway, moving on to real local stories here. So a hiker was rescued on the Tuckerman Ravine Trail. And this happened on Wednesday, September 27th. So we're about 2 weeks behind.
Yeah, it's been busy.
64-year-old gentleman from Methuen, Mass. That's my neck of the woods here. He was hiking alone with his dog on Tuckerman Ravine. Where he was coming down from the summit, he stepped on an unstable rock. So I'm assuming he might have been up on the cone there because there's a lot of unstable rocks. So he lost his footing and fell, sustaining non-life-threatening injuries. Luckily enough, a fellow hiker came upon him and called 911, and AMC conservation officers and an AMC rescuer were able to respond from Hermit Lake Hut and administer medical aid to this gentleman. So he was able to reach the Sherburne Ski Trail and they were able to get him out by ATV. So they were able to assist him back to the ATV with the aid of crutches and assistance of rescuers on the scene, and eventually he was driven down to Pinkham Notch. Assessment was done, and it was determined that he did not need medical transport from Pinkham Notch, so he was going to take himself to the hospital. So all's well that ends well. It's just a little slip, and it happens.
It sure does. A couple plane crashes and a helicopter crash this week. Unusual.
Yeah. So this next one is a plane crash. I read about this one. So this was a fatality, I believe. So this report here is just the initial plane crash that happened on September 30th before 8 p.m. Fish and Game was notified of a plane crash on Lake Winnipesaukee in Guilford. They conducted a search. They were able to locate debris in the water, but they weren't able to locate the pilot. So I guess eventually the next day they had to suspend the search that day, and then 11:30 on October 1st they were able to locate the pilot in nearly 60 feet of water. NTSB, so the National Transportation Safety Bureau, will investigate this and figure out the cause of the crash. But that's a sad story, and it's got to be horrifying to be a pilot and know that you're going down, and maybe you have some hope that if you're going to hit water, you have a better chance of survival. But I think essentially it's like hitting concrete regardless, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, based upon the results of most of these crashes, yeah, you could assume so. It's rare that people survive.
Yeah. Would you, if again going back to my whole like, if you hit the lottery, would you think that you would like get a pilot license and try to get into flying?
No.
Is that something you're not interested in? That too high risk?
Absolutely. Yeah, feet on the ground. That's my motto.
Okay. Do you fly like you do like flying to like vacation and stuff, right?
Not in a very long time. Can't remember the last time I flew. I think I flew during physical therapy school down to Florida to St. Pete's, and that was probably it.
Are you like afraid to fly, or you just don't like, you're not into traveling that much?
I'm just not really into traveling. If I were to travel, I would do I find like a car trip. Driving across country would be more romantic to me than flying to a location. I like the randomness of just jumping into a car and going.
Well, if we're going to do a trip, we're going to have to fly, because I don't want to do anything romantic with you.
Well, I was thinking Mrs. Stomp. But if you're talking about you and me, then...
Oh, I was going to say, well, I have my friend Tom, like he's now that we came back to Yosemite, he's already hitting me up for the next plan. He's like, we could do the Grand Canyon, we could do Iceland, he wants to do the Tetons, I think it is.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, maybe we'll drive to Stomp. We'll take you along with us. It won't be
comes to
romantic,
mind
though,
first?
I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, right. Nova Scotia. Let's go to Nova Scotia. We can walk the hills.
Yeah, we could do that. So.
That's a boat ride.
Yes, true. We can go. We can stop at Acadia. We have that in our pocket. As a matter of fact, we got to do that first before we do anything.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, this next one is on Monadnock. So this was on October 1st, around 12:15. Lost hiker. So rangers are notified of a lost hiker. The rangers were able to provide. So somebody got a call from 911. And they were able to get the GPS coordinates for the hiker. And then, this is written strangely. So, Fish and Game was notified by a Department of Natural and Cultural Resources Mountain Patrol ranger about a lost hiker at Monadnock State Park. Rangers were able to provide conservation officers with cell phone GPS coordinates for the lost hiker. Mm-hmm. The lost hiker was then requested to call 911 in order for them to confirm the coordinates. So I don't really understand that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Eventually, they found the coordinates, and they were able to locate the hiker on the north side of Monadnock between Pompelli and Dublin Trail, and halfway up the summit, between the summit and Old Troy Road in the town of Dublin. So it's within the park, but very rural with like not a lot of trails. So he was on like the other side of Pompelli Trail. So I'd never really been over there. Mm-hmm. So they found this lady, was a 56-year-old lady from Weymouth, Mass. And she was given instructions to follow a stream down the mountain, and then conservation officers would meet with her. So they must have just figured out from her GPS coordinates. They looked on the map, saw that she was in a drainage, and just said, keep following it down. And around 1:30 or so, they located her, and they were able to transport her back to the state park headquarters. So no injuries or anything like that. She was prepared for a day hike, but she didn't have any sufficient means for navigating. So you see that a fair amount on Monadnock. People get lost.
So let me see this. So 12:15, and then at 1:30 they located her.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was daylight. So asking somebody to follow a stream down isn't completely unreasonable. I was thinking, boy, if it was like nighttime, that'd be pretty treacherous.
True, yeah.
Interesting. True. You don't hear about that type of scenario too often.
No, not at all. And you can see, I can see on the map here, sorry, I'm looking at Geyer as we're talking, but there's a big, there's a bunch of private land between the Dublin Trail and Pompelli Trail. So this is on the very northeast side of the mountain, where there's not a lot of trail systems in between them. So it looks like she sort of went off and got herself into that section there. There is some private trails, but I don't really know where the drainage is that she followed down. But anyway, I guess all's well that ends well. That's an interesting one.
It is different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this is an area I'm not familiar with. Lost hiker on Waypack National Wildlife Refuge Swamp. Do you know about this?
I do not. I do not know this region.
So this is in Greenfield, New Hampshire. So Bureau of Emergency Communications. So this is 911. They were notified of a lost hiker. They were able to provide the cell phone GPS coordinates for the lost hiker. This was a 68-year-old gentleman from Peterborough, New Hampshire. So this is, 3 incidents where they've relied on 911 GPS technology now, right, Tom?
Right, that's right. Yeah.
So interesting. So 68-year-old gentleman from Peterborough, New Hampshire, the coordinates were used to map him between the Waypack Trail and Carolyn's Trail. So this area is rural and between the summit of North Pack Monadnock, which is located within the refuge. So I'm just not that familiar with this area. So they were eventually able to locate him. So they had local fire department and county sheriffs helping out, along with a conservation officer. And like I said, the call came in around 11:50. Around 1:35, officers located the hiker within 300 feet of his last known location. They were able to guide him out of the woods, and he made it back around 2:10. So it was about a 2.5 hour incident for him. So he was well prepared, and he also possessed a valid 2023 hike safe card.
Okay.
So hooray.
Yeah. I'm doing some digging here about the I think it's WAPAC.
WAPAC, yep.
Yeah, wapac.org might be a good place to stop in to read about this place. There's quite a bit of history here. And, wow. Yeah, it's the Wapac Trail, Mount Watatic. Yeah, it seems like it's southern New Hampshire, near, 4 miles from New Hampshire Route 123, Mass Route 119. Definitely south, but beautiful pictures.
Yeah, I know. At some point, Stomp, we need to get down in that area. I've always had like the Sunapee Greenway Trail like on the bucket list to check out, and some other stuff. So we got to get down in that area at some point.
Yeah. Yep, Temple Mountain ski area.
Yes. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do a talk about this, a segment about it, because there's a lot there.
Yeah. We'll have to do some digging. But okay. So next up is stop me if you've heard this one before, Stomp. But unprepared hikers on Falling Waters Trail.
No.
Believe
Falling
it or not.
people.
So. Yep, 7:05 p.m. on Wednesday, October 4th, Fish and Game gets a call for 2 hikers that had lost the trail due to lack of sufficient lights. Stomp, I got to pull together the data for this year, but I do believe that in the last 2 months or so, the 60 to 69-year-old crowd has really taken the lead in rescues this year.
I think you're right. I've noticed that as well.
A lot of 60-somethings, so.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
plus.
October 4th, 7:05 p.m., 2 hikers had lost the trail due to lack of sufficient lights. They were cold, wet, and without any food or water and unsure how to continue. So this is hit the panic button. So 65-year-old from New York and a 69-year-old from Fernandina Beach, Florida. So they set out at 7 a.m. Stomp.
Yeah.
For a 9-mile hike.
Crack of dawn.
And it's 7:05 p.m.
Right. That's a hell of a day.
That's a long day. So they had summited Mount Lafayette, Mount Lincoln, and Little Haystack.
Right.
But unfortunately, the hike took longer than they expected, which would explain why they started at 7 a.m. and it's now 7 p.m. and they're still on trail.
Wow.
They ran out of water and they ran out of daylight, causing them to lose the trail. So a conservation officer responded to the mountain and hiked 1.3 miles up Falling Waters Trail, reaching the pier at 8:35, and then gave them lights and assisted them down the trail, and they were out by 10. So that's good. They were able to hike out on their own, but that's a long day.
It sure is. It's amazing.
This is the definition of biting off more than you can chew.
Correct. Yeah, no doubt about it. But 1.3 out to the trailhead is not too shabby.
They were close.
I wonder if they were near any water.
I don't know. How do you get thirsty on falling waters? I don't know.
It's just asking.
So my wife's cousin, so Uncle Fran is my wife's uncle, and her cousin Jessica. So they're from Long Island, and Fran's a character. He's the one. I don't know if you have this family member, but he's the family member that writes the Christmas letter that like updates everyone on what's going on with the family for the year. Like I love every year, like Uncle Fran sends a letter and I immediately I'm like, everything stops. I'm reading the letter. I get so excited. Great. So, and Jessica is my wife's cousin, but she's like, she was like probably 15 years younger, 10 years younger than everybody else. She was like the baby. But Jessica took Fran on Franconia. This is like 10 years ago. And I think that Jessica and Fran were sort of like these two. From what I can tell, I think that Fran was not prepared to like go across the ridge, and it was like a total disaster, and they almost died, but like they sort of don't admit it, but they kind of admit it. So
right.
I got to ask Jessica next time I see her. So I had done the Pemi loop with her husband last year, the overnight. So I got to dig into that story a little bit more. Maybe I'll have her on to share her falling people story.
That's excellent.
Okay, so next up, there's an injured hiker on Pine Mountain.
Right. So I think this is up in Littleton.
Pine Mountain is in Gorham.
Oh, okay. Gorham. I'm thinking of something different.
Yeah, and I actually cringed when I saw this because I always talk about this one as being one of the hikes I recommend for fall foliage because it's one of those ones that like drops you in the middle of like really good foliage. So hopefully this wasn't a listener that got hurt.
Huh. Okay, let's check it out.
So 12 p.m. on October 8th, Fish and Game conservation officers were notified of an injured hiker on Pine Mountain Trail approximately a half a mile from Pine Mountain Road. So the call came in via a 911 call reporting an unknown leg injury. So Androscoggin Search and Rescue, conservation officers arrived. 56-year-old gentleman from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, had been on a day hike with his wife when he slipped on wet ground near the summit and sustained a significant leg injury. While waiting for a rescue response, other Good Samaritan hikers who came upon him helped secure his injured leg. I bet you those Good Samaritan hikers are the ones that were listening to the show that we recommended they hike there.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. That's what it is. So the first rescuers arrived at 1:30 and placed the victim in a rescue litter. And then 3 AVSAR volunteers, a conservation officer, and 5 Good Samaritans helped carry the victim down to Pine Mountain Road. And from there, he was placed in a private vehicle and driven out to Pinkham B Road, where he was transferred into a Gorham ambulance. And then he got to Androscoggin Valley Hospital in Berlin for treatment of his injury. So all's good.
Yeah.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
That's right. That is right. Nice job, AVSAR.
Yes, yeah. And I see Xylo walking around behind.
Yes. I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
He waits for the moments where I'm not looking, and then he starts chewing on audio cables. And I wonder why my computer's always a mess.
Right. Hey, funny story about Xylo, by the way, Stomp.
Okay, what?
So Mrs. Mike pays attention to the Instagram a little bit. So
okay,
she picked up that I forget the photographer, the artist name that had put together the Xylo inspired art for you.
Yes.
So I think you had posted a picture of it. It arrived at the house.
Correct.
So Stomp has a new Xylo themed. It's like a wooden. It's like a close up of sort of wood grain. It's really cool.
It's beautiful.
So I was explaining to Mrs. Mike was asking. She's like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, Stomp got that from a listener." So Mrs. Mike immediately is like, "Well, why aren't you getting free stuff from listeners?" And I said to her, "Well, I mean, the listener was inspired by Stomp's cat." Correct. So if you want to get free stuff, we were going to have to get a cat. And she said, "Oh, never mind, forget it."
Or a dog.
Yeah. So anyway.
Oh my God.
She was jealous until she found out that I had to get a cat. So then she changed her mind quick. She changed the subject.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So next one here, Stomp. Helicopter crash in Croydon. I don't know where Croydon is.
I'm not sure. Maybe, I think it's in Grafton.
Really?
Yeah, Grafton County anyway.
Croydon, New Hampshire.
Yeah, Croydon.
Oh, it's by Sunapee. All right, that would make sense. So, don't spend much time out there. So 10:20 p.m. on Sunday the 8th, October 8th, Fishing Game was notified of a possible helicopter crash in Croydon. So JBI Helicopter Services out of Pembroke, New Hampshire reported one of their helicopters departed from their location in Croydon around 7:30. After it departed, the helicopter couldn't be tracked on radar by the employees. Generally, a position is sent from the helicopter every couple of minutes to enable the pinpointing of the helicopter's flight pattern. It was scheduled to fly to a job site in Quonset, Rhode Island, and arrive later that evening. Fish and Game officers, New Hampshire State Police helicopter unit, and members of the Croydon Fire Department responded to Pine Hill Road to search for the missing helicopter. And around 1:50 a.m. on Monday, it was located by a ground search crew in the woods off of Pine Hill Road. Substantial damage was done to the helicopter, and the pilot was found deceased. So that's terrible.
Yeah, it's awful.
So conservation officers and members of the Croydon, Springfield, and Grantham fire departments assisted in the short carryout to an awaiting UTV. So the pilot was a 73-year-old from Loudon, New Hampshire, and he'd been a pilot for 50 years and had started working for the JBI Helicopter Services in the 1980s. So, I mean, at that point, he's probably like family to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah,
under investigation, so no idea as to what happened.
Yeah, that is terrible. That's terrible. I was at the Freiburg Fair this weekend, Stomp, and they have like 2 helicopters going back and forth, and I was thinking to myself, like, I'm not getting in one of those.
Well, I was going to say, if you were offering to take me somewhere in a helicopter, I'd probably have to say no as well.
Well, it depends. If it was like Captain, or if it was like Luke, I would go up, but it's not. I'm not going in one of those little tiny ones.
You would do a Black Hawk?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I trust them.
Okay.
All right, and then last but not least, Stomp, and then we gotta close the shows. Are going to be long. 2 hikers located off trail at Frankenstein Cliff. So October 9th. We got some young ones here. So we got some young ladies from the Cape Cod area. So 24-year-olds, 2 24-year-olds from East Sandwich and West Dennis. Mm-hmm. So that's the Cape, I think. They were not prepared with lights. So they had managed to get off trail on Frankenstein Cliff Trail and were not prepared. Around 8:45. So they called around, 7 o'clock, they were notified of 2 hikers had managed to get off trail. And around 8:45, conservation officers, along with volunteers from Lakes Region Search and Rescue, hiked up to the location where the 2 hikers were believed to be. They were found around 9:50 and given lights and escorted back to the trailhead. And bring your headlamps, people.
Yeah, it's funny. Mrs. Stump always talks about this as being one of her favorite hikes. I've never done it. It's supposed to be amazing.
I don't think I've been on. I've done like Ripley Falls and Arethusa Falls a bunch, but I don't think I've gone on the Frankenstein Cliffs.
Well, thankfully, they didn't get off trail near the cliffs.
True, because then they would be in for a much worse day than they already were. But
yeah, for sure,
it happens. People forget their lights, I guess.
Yep.
All right, Stomp. So that is going to do it for the show. What did we learn today?
That was a good one.
We learned about covered bridges. We learned about Bigfoot.
I think the overriding theme was, starting with hiking buddies, check the weather forecast and get ready for the winter.
It's coming.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Stomp. Until next time.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered in today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information at SLASRPodcast.com. That's SLASRPodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until then, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some mega peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words to describe this race. Do we all know what they are? Only one hell!
Lieutenant James Nealon, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got a list of the 10 essential items and had those in their packs, they probably would have no need to ever call us at all.